Let me welcome you all to the first session of the Land Use Institute Fall Conference. My name is David Hershey. I'm the current chair of the Utah Land Use Institute. I'm supported by a wonderful board of directors and our magnificent executive director, Craig Call, and his staff, and their names are all on the second page of this booklet. Hopefully you've received a copy of that. Just a few housekeeping items to get started with. We have some education credits available for those who are participating today and tomorrow. Sign-up sheets are in the lobby. Be sure and stop by and sign up for those. There is Wi-Fi in the building, and the Wi-Fi is posted at the back and also here at the front if you need to connect this afternoon. And also, would like to make sure that you all are aware of the materials that are outside. Hopefully you were able to pick those up. We're especially pleased to have with us this Journal of Comparative Urban Law and Policy, which was prepared as a script in honor of Arthur Chris Nelson, who is a member of our board on the occasion of his 50 years in planning as a planning professional. We're very pleased to have Dr. Nelson with us, and he'll be speaking to us later in the conference. We're very appreciative of the sponsors that make this fall conference possible, and I'd like to honor those today. The S.J. and Jesse E. Quinney Foundation, the Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman, Utah Department of Commerce, Salt Lake County, and Denton, Durham, Jones, and Pinnegar. I'd also like to express our appreciation for our Institute partners, the Utah League of Cities and Towns, Utah Association of Realtors, Salt Lake Association of Realtors, the Home Builders of Utah, the Real Estate Section of the Utah State Bar, and the Utah chapter of the American Planning Association. It's my pleasure at this time to introduce Mark Stratford, who will also introduce the panel. Mark is General Counsel for Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District. He worked for Ogden City from 2007 to 2022 as Deputy City Attorney and Assistant City Attorney, where he focused on land use, water, public works, and building code matters. Prior to working for Ogden City, Mr. Stratford was an Assistant Attorney General representing the Utah State Engineer in water rights general adjudication cases throughout the state. Mark is a member of the Utah Water Task Force, which advises the legislature and the governor on water-related matters, and has represented the Utah League of Cities and Towns on the Utah Watershed Council. He enjoys hiking in the summer and is an avid skier in the winter, and being a skier, he's very invested in this topic that we'll be talking about this afternoon. So welcome, Mark Stratford.
While the panel is coming up here, I just want to say I'm really happy that Craig and the Institute decided to talk about water on the first day of this conference this year. So in the time I was with Ogden City, I was also on the Land Use Task Force and enjoyed all of the opportunities to work with developers there, but I had this dual interest in both water and land use, and I'd show up to land use meetings, and sometimes water would come up, and everybody knew it was important, but they had more important things to focus on, like subdivisions and zoning and referenda. And so it's great to have an opportunity to have these two worlds have a chance to talk with each other today and to present some information this afternoon. So today we have with us Shelby Ericksen down here on the end. She is the Water Conservation Section Manager at the Division of Water Resources, where she works on water conservation plans and administers statewide efficiency and rebate programs. She also graduated from Southern Utah University, and while she was there, she did some work with Central Iron County Water Conservancy District, and then after graduation worked there as a public outreach and water conservation coordinator. And so she'll talk to us a little bit about her role at the state, but also a little bit about Iron County. And then Bart Forsyth is next to her. He is the general manager of Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District. Went to school in civil engineering and started with Jordan Valley in 1985. So he has been there he's in his 38th year. And I'm not sure everybody on the panel was alive when he started there. But he has been instrumental. In establishing water conservation programs, both for Jordan Valley and then those that have led into other areas of the state. Next we have Jonathan Parry with Weber Basin Water Conservancy District up in Layton. They serve the 5 counties kind of up there, more northern Utah. And he is an assistant general manager over long-term planning and conservation with degrees in civil and environmental engineering. And he actually got his job, or found his job, at Weber Basin when he was sitting in a bowling alley looking for a job, and a better job than the one he had, I guess, or a more interesting one. And then we have Zack Renstrom next to me here. He is the general manager for the Washington County Water Conservancy District. He has served as a Washington County commissioner, and he had so much fun there, decided to get a job as the general manager. He went to school as originally as an engineer, as a professional instructional engineer, and since he had so much fun there, he decided to go to law school. So Zack kind of knows and does everything. So what we'll do here is we'll go in that order, starting with Shelby and coming this way, and they'll each have a short presentation that they'll do, and then we'll do some question and answers. Shelby, the clicker is right here.
All right, good afternoon. I'm happy to be here to talk about water. Is that working? Okay. All right, so I'm with the Utah Division of Water Resources, and our mission at the Utah Division of Water Resources is to plan, conserve, develop, and protect Utah's water resources. And just a side note, we are celebrating our 75th anniversary this year. So I just want to talk a little bit about drought on a statewide level, and I'm sure these guys will be talking about drought within their areas. This is the most recent drought monitor map. These are released every Thursday, so this is from last Thursday, and as you can see, most of the state is in some degree of severe, extreme, or exceptional drought. And we have been in drought for the last 3 years and about 8 out of the past 10 years. So we're in what's called a mega drought right now. These are our reservoir levels. So currently we're at 44% of capacity. This is about the same as it was last year, which given our drought conditions, this is due to conservation. We have seen more water in our reservoirs because of conservation. We had some good summer monsoons, which have also helped keep water in the reservoirs. If you see these red dots, these are reservoirs that are below 20% throughout the state. And just to note that these reservoirs vary in size. Some of these are just single years reservoirs, some of them are multi-year. And snowpack is what refills reservoirs. This is just a seasonal outlook. This is for December, January, and February. You can see that our temperature is anticipated to be above average. Our precipitation is a mix between equal chances to below, depending on what part of the state you're in. Touching on the Great Salt Lake, we have the Great Salt Lake at the record high in 1986, and the year 2000 when it was about average, and then the current level as of earlier this month. I just want to highlight some drought response. So if you look at each of these bullet points, these are water savings that we saw throughout the state. So you can see that Salt Lake City saved a lot of water. We have Sandy City highlighted, Washington County, Weber Basin, Jordan Valley, and then Utah Water Savers, which is where we process rebates, has processed over 23,000 smart controller rebates and 3,000 toilet rebates since those programs began in 2018 and 2019. Here are some other stats. Just Washington County Water Conservancy District has some new ordinances that were passed this year, which I'm sure Zack will touch on. And those are anticipated to save nearly 11 billion gallons of water in the next 10 years. We've seen other areas adopting these water efficiency standards throughout the state within Weber Basin Service Area, Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District, and Central Utah Water Conservancy District. So I just want to talk a little bit about growth. So we've talked about drought. We'll go into growth and just our statewide population growth. So this is taken from Chem C. Gardner Policy Institute. This was released earlier this year. So this is 2020 to 2060 population growth. So you can see these darker counties that are highlighted are our top growing counties, expected to add over 100,000 residents. And these counties include Utah County, Salt Lake County, Washington, Davis, and Weber counties. And I just want to note Tooele County's up there as well, just at 75,000. So they're getting up there as well. So these are some growth statistics from the Regional Water Conservation Goals Report that was released a couple of years ago. Utah's among the fastest growing states in the country. It's also one of the driest with our annual precipitation. As our population continues to grow, so will our demand for water. And so that's why it's really important to have water conservation and development working in parallel. So Mark mentioned that I came from Cedar City. That's where I got my start working in the wonderful world of water. I started as a college intern, which turned into a full-time position. And so I just wanted to highlight some of what Iron County is experiencing in southern Utah. And I took these slides from a presentation that was given from Central Iron County Water Conservancy District. So they currently have a groundwater management plan because their basin, the safe yield, so of what they can be using from the ground that's safe, is 21,000 acre feet a year. And they're currently using 28,000 acre feet of water a year. So there is a deficit of 7,000 acre feet. And that has created some problems like subsidence inland. They have the highest growth rate of all of the Utah counties. They have had their second driest year, second warmest year, and with the driest, warmest, there was also some flooding that happened in 2021. So this just paints the picture that, water is a statewide challenge. We have different areas of the state, but water is something that needs to be on the radar of everyone, no matter where you're at. So I mentioned earlier the regional water conservation goals, so I thought I would touch on those. These were developed, these are the different regions that the state was divided in for these goals. And so these are water reduction goals for each of these regions. You can see there's 9 regions in the state. And these are the goals. So it's based on, the baseline year is 2015, and these are goals for 2030, and then there are goals extending out to other years. And so this is really important. The Governor Herbert had a goal of reducing 25% water usage by 2025, and this is what has replaced that goal. So just some considerations about our population growth and drought. These are taken from Chem C. Gardner Institute and also the Regional Water Conservation Goals Report. We have a decreasing household size. You can see 2022 compared to 2060. We have an increasing population size. And then we have decreasing lot sizes. And this is due to land availability, smaller lot preferences, and increasing number of multifamily units. So some solutions. We have 3 solutions that we focus on for long-term conservation, and those are regulation, incentives, and education. So these are just some water conservation measures. We are expanding to have a statewide turf buyback program that will be having a full launch in the early spring. Outdoor water usage makes up 60% of our M&I, our municipal and industrial use. Another is integrated land and water planning. I see that Joanna Enterwada is on the program for a little bit later, and she'll be talking about that, but just bringing everybody to the table for the land and water planning to make sure that we're taking care of the needs. Statewide installation of secondary water meters, and also agriculture optimization. So secondary water meters, the legislature appropriated $250 million for secondary water meters this past legislative session. So far, we've authorized about $190 million. The Board of Water Resources has been providing grants to help offset these costs. It is estimated that these connections will save almost 54,000 acre-feet of water just by putting these meters in and letting residents know what their water use is. There is some additional needs for funding to finish the project, and we're anticipating a 20 to 30% reduction. All right, and then just touching on landscaping rebates, this is House Bill 121. This was also passed this last legislative session. So replacing grass with water-wise landscaping can save up to 2/3 less water. And so this is something that we will be pushing, especially coming this spring, because grass is not the enemy, but we need to be pro-planning and make sure that we're putting in grass in areas that make sense. Because there are alternative landscaping options that use less water. We have a sign up on conservewater.utah.gov if you'd like to be kept in the know about what's going on. We are planning for a soft pilot program launch later this week where we'll be testing out the rules and the program, and those will be available on a limited basis with additional application periods coming with the full rollout in the spring. And those are my resources. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I appreciate being here with you. Again, my name is Bart Forsyth. I'm General Manager of Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District. This is a nice group. It's a group that we don't normally get to reach out to all that much, so I feel like this is a great opportunity. I think the basic premise of my presentation today really is to sort of illustrate to you competing demands that we're seeing now on our water supply, which I think are really being highlighted by continuing drought conditions that we've seen. And what I hope to achieve is to have you all agree that in moving forward, the clear path that we see essentially is that all new growth needs to go in water efficiently in order for us to continue growing like we have in the past. So let me just provide a little bit of background. Jordan Valley Water District, we're a regional water supplier of drinking water. We provide water on a wholesale basis to 17 member agencies, which are shown here. Our service area is most of Salt Lake County outside of Salt Lake City and Sandy. We supply water to about 750,000 people, drinking water. And you'll see here on this map to the right, Jordanelle Reservoir and Deer Creek Reservoir. About 80% of Jordan Valley's water is derived through the Provo River system. That's where we get most of our water for our service area. I don't normally show this all that often, but I thought you might be interested. I'm going to be talking about our water supply resources. This shows all of our portfolio of water sources that we draw from each year. And what you'll see here is I'm showing years 2020 and 2021. You'll see up at the top says acre feet. That's the volume of water that we deliver in acre feet each year. And an acre foot of water is about 326,000 gallons. And for the most part, about a half or a 6/10 of an acre foot is enough water for a family of 4 for a year. So you take a look at that, you'll see quite a difference between years 2020 and 2021. And the reason for that is because of conservation that's happened within our communities, where there's been a conservation message due to the drought, and you can see there's been good conservation results, about a 12% reduction since 2020. So those are the diversions from our supply. This then is the water deliveries that we show to each of our member agencies. And you can see at the bottom the same numbers, 120,000 acre feet, 106,000 acre feet between 2020 and 2021. But you also see all the water that's being delivered to our member agencies. And you'll see some of the larger ones, the Granger Hunter Improvement District, City of South Jordan, City of West Jordan, now growing leaps and bounds and requiring more water every year. So that kind of gives you the complexion of our existing uses. But now I want to go into some of these competing demands, if you will, on our water supply, competing forces that we're seeing now based on drought conditions. Drought, changing climate, and our environment. So let's talk about the drought a little bit. This graph shows the 3 reservoirs that are most important to our water supply. You see on the left, Jordanelle Reservoir, in the middle, Deer Creek, and on the right, Utah Lake. And you'll note on these graphs that the gold line is normal for this time of year as far as the percent full, and then the black line would be totally full for each of these. And then on the left-hand side of each graph, the darker blue is current volume, and the lighter blue is the volume last year at this time. If we take the combined storage of all of these reservoirs, last year we were sitting at about 51% of total volume or total capacity. Now we're sitting at 42% of total capacity. So we've lost some ground, even though this last year we've had about a normal precipitation. And it's been hard to catch up. So we've seen some of the most severe drought conditions that I've seen in my lifetime, especially as I've worked at Jordan Valley Water. So the climate, I want to talk a little about climate, and essentially the climate is changing before our very eyes. And that change is really being manifested in warmer temperatures. Did all of you feel like it was a warm summer? Well, if you take a look at this graph, what this shows is the average temperature for the meteorological summer, that is June, July, and August. It's the average temperature over those 3 months, and we go all the way back to year 1875. What you'll see here is this last year, of course, was the warmest on record. The second warmest on record was the previous year. But the thing that's alarming is this inclining trend of increasing temperatures. With increasing temperatures, that impacts us on the water supply side because it takes more water up in evaporation, and then also on the water demand side because the public wants to water more because of the warmer temperatures as our plants require more water. And then when we have the environment is crying out for water right now, and that's being underscored by a declining Great Salt Lake. And I know you're going to hear a lot about the Great Salt Lake in the next panel session. So if we add to this complexity of all these demands on our water supply, now we have growth. And naturally, you've seen that the state of Utah is projected to grow about double between now and 2070. Within Jordan Valley's service area, the area I just showed you, we're projecting a 70% increase in growth between now and 2065. Most of that growth within Jordan Valley service area is going to happen or occur on the eastern side, the western side of our valley, in the West Bench lands, and you can see those being highlighted sort of in that gold color. We're going to be asked or expected to supply water to that growth, and we'll be expected to annex those lands into Jordan Valley service area as they grow. And essentially, there are discussions now on these lands being developed in the near future. So I hope that I've convinced you at this point that in order for us to grow and continue to enjoy economic viability, good economic growth, we're going to need to grow in a water efficient manner. So I think what I want to focus on now just for a few minutes is that where the rubber really meets the road in achieving water conservation or reduced use is in our landscapes. And what you can see here in this video is a subdivision that's gone in completely water-wise. Jordan Valley Water has spent time in developing water efficiency standards, and we've been discussing those standards with our member agencies or member cities, and many now have adopted these standards by ordinance, meaning that all new development that goes in into place will be water efficient going forward. And the amount of water savings will be significant. And you can see those here that have adopted those standards. We've also developed standards for commercial landscapes. And here's a good example of a commercial landscape that has gone in water-wise. Once again, this is the wave of the future. This is what needs to happen as we move forward. So this is my last slide, and this essentially what this does is it puts it's Jordan Valley Water's water supply plan going all the way out to year 2070. And what I'm going to tell you is that we're doing a lot of work and efforts in making sure that we have enough water. And if we're able to continue to develop like I'm showing here, we have your back. We'll have enough water to continue to grow. But if we don't, we're going to have problems. One of the things I'll show you on this graph, so the gray bars here are existing supply, and the color bars are future supplies that we bring online in the future. The gold lines are various scenarios for demand over time, demand by our service area. That dashed line on top is the demand that we would have seen if we continued to use water as we did back in year 2020. What we've seen is substantial water conservation results in terms of reduced per capita demand on a per capita basis. So there wouldn't have been enough water available if we continued to use water as we did back in 2020, but we've seen good results. The line that we need to stay on, though, is that bottom gold line that has the whiskers on it. That assumes that we meet all the water conservation goals that Shelby just talked about in the Regional Water Conservation Goals report, and that we move forward in a water-wise fashion. The only way we can do that is for all new development to be water-wise going into place in the future. And Jordan Valley and the rest, and many other water districts are going to be working on existing landscapes where we're providing incentives to basically replace less efficient landscapes with more water efficient landscapes. And that's all I have for you. Thanks.
So I too would like to voice my appreciation for the opportunity to be here. I kind of feel like I could get up and just, my boy refers to it as repeat parakeet. You've heard a lot of good information here from Shelby and Bart, and Weber Basin, while having a slightly different water supply portfolio and customer base, certainly is experiencing the same difficulties in planning to basically overcome the same challenges. So that's what I'll do, is you're going to hear a lot of the same information, maybe from Weber Basin's perspective and what we're doing to tackle some of those challenges. I hope to kind of educate you guys on who we are, where our water comes from, and exactly that, what we're going to do with the existing supply to make sure that we're being efficient and optimal in its utilization. So with that in mind, I start out some of these presentations with this quote by John F. Kennedy that says, "Change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future." Basically just pointing out things are going to have to change. To the point of what Bart was saying, our expectations as far as how we utilize our water resources, what our landscapes look like, the efficient uses of those waters are all going to have to be accounted for, and we're going to have a greater understanding of what we can do. So who is Weber Basin, and why should you care? So Weber Basin Water Conservancy District is another regional water supplier located up in northern Utah. Our service area is essentially 5 counties, so Davis, Weber, Summit, Morgan, and we get, by virtue of Willard Bay, to claim Box Elder, so we got a little sliver up in that area. About 2,800 square miles, like I mentioned, 5 counties, about 700,000 residents that reside up in these areas. Our water supply is made up of storage predominantly through the construction of the Weber Basin project by the federal government back in the 1950s and 60s. So 7 dams. We got Smith and Morehouse, which was our most recent acquisition. We got Rockport, Lost Canyon. East Canyon was enlarged as part of our project to store more water. Causey Reservoir. Pineview was another one that was enlarged, and then our largest off-stream reservoir site of Willard Bay with a storage capacity of 250,000 acre feet. I'll show some other slides, but the district has storage capacities of about 407,000 acre-feet of water. Like Shelby referenced in her slide where it showed the different capacities and storage volumes in our reservoirs right now. Varying different reservoirs have different storage capacities with different delivery intents. Weber Basin's facilities were designed to have a 2-year carry. So that means that theoretically we have 2 years of water in storage at the beginning of every irrigation season. We draw it down throughout the irrigation season with the expectation that we're close to being able to fill with that next winter season that comes through. We operate 4 water treatment plants are in district's ownership. 3 of those are operational. We've got 3 power plants, one at the base of Causey, one at the base of Wanship, and then one on our Gateway Canal structure. Over 500 miles of pipeline, and we do have one of the largest contiguous secondary systems in the nation in Davis and Weber County. So our existing supply, here's where it is. Weber Basin has a reliable yield based on past supply and demand studies of about 270,000 acre-feet of water. About 207,000 of that comes from the Weber Basin project, and the district has gone out and developed and acquired additional water rights and irrigation company shares to make up another 62,000 acre-feet-ish of water. One thing you'll notice, I'll go back to this map real quick right here, that I think we should emphasize is that Weber Basin is certainly a large player as it relates to water development, water deliveries, water supplies, but we play by the same rules as everybody else is in the water rights system. We're not the only player, we are a large player. And you'll see that in some of my other slides here, that there are a lot of stakeholders, there's a lot of collaboration that needs to take place to make sure that we are being efficient with the water resources of our drainage. One other thing I will note is the Weber Basin drainage. Shelby mentioned kind of the state of Utah being the second driest state. Well, that's, different areas of the state have different water supplies and water resources. So the Weber Basin drainage is one of the more productive drainages in the state of Utah. We average about 26 inches, and once again, that is coming predominantly from our snowpack. So we have areas that get a lot of snow up in those upper Uintas. All right, here's our customer list. We got a large footprint, so we've got a lot of irrigation companies. Like I mentioned, we've got one of the largest secondary systems in the nation, and you can see that in that irrigation customer list. We are providing a lot of water to those companies, untreated water companies as well as treated. So nearly every municipality from North Salt Lake up to North Ogden is being delivered water from Weber Basin's inventory. You can kind of see how our contracts break out between the untreated and the treated water. And our agricultural deliveries as well. So what are some of the challenges that we're dealing with? Well, drought. We'll talk about drought a lot. The district we completed a drought contingency plan back in 2018 where we brought a lot of our stakeholders together and said, okay, what if we experience a drought? What are we going to do? Recognizing that we're all players, we've all got water rights, what are we going to do to mitigate kind of the impacts of a drought condition? And so what we did is we did a lot of collected a lot of data as far as recorded information to make sure that we had an understanding of how our systems operated historically. We also engaged in a paleohydrology, so we looked at tree rings to go all the way back to the 1400s and say, hey, had our system been here using models, how many times would we have been in these dire drought conditions? And if we're going to put drought mitigation measures out there that anticipate reductions in water use, how often would we be operating in those scenarios? Just so that, like Bart said, as the rubber hits the road, we didn't have a plan that just sat on the shelf and collected dust, but we had an actionable plan that when we experienced drought conditions, we had stakeholder buy-in, and we could go out there and really mitigate some of those impacts. So this is what we've experienced. So you talk about good timing. We got that plan done in about 2018, and come 2020, the district was able to store about 22,000 acre-feet of water. We generally store about 200,000 acre-feet of water, and like I mentioned, we've got capacity of about 408,000 acre-feet of water. So it was a substantial reduction to the district's storage volumes. That was extremely scary. It was one of the lower volumes we've ever experienced. I think there was 1 year prior to this where we were down in that 16,000 acre-foot range. And so obviously we were able to implement some of those mitigation measures and help get through that year. Now obviously as you leave a bad year, you're expecting or hoping, praying, that the next year is going to be better. It didn't. It was worse. We got 7,300 acre-feet of water in our reservoirs. We had a 2-year storage, and this is what we gained over a 2-year period, about 30,000 acre-feet of water. So if any of you have been up in Davis and Weber County over the last several years, you've probably been made aware of some of our educational material. We've been very aggressive, and this is why we've been very aggressive. We are trying to ensure that we have drinking water supplies. That's our number one priority. We will not short drinking water supplies. It's not where we want to be. But we do have a lot of flexibility as far as agriculture and irrigation of landscapes and things like that. And then this year, a little bit better, 57,000 acre feet. I'd like to sit up here and say, well, the odds are things are going to be better. I played those cards in those first 2 years and it never got any better. So we're going to continue to plan and be ready for bad conditions, but hopefully the odds will give us a better year. Statistics play out. Real quick, this is what we can kind of boil our drought contingency plan down to. We had normal, advisory, moderate, severe, extreme, exceptional. We broke down based on what our June 1st storage volumes were as far as where we would be operating. And once again, I've stressed this in other presentations, but we have a large stakeholder group, right? We have a lot of customers. We also have a lot of other water right users and senior water right holders in our system. And the buy-in of those entities is why we've been able to get through these drought conditions and have that public buy-in where the conservation measures have been adhered to. We too are experiencing or anticipating some rapid population growth. Here's some of our supply and demand study charts. I'm going to run through these really quick. It's just a slightly different visualization of what Bart showed. You can see in our area we've got a significant amount of water tied up in secondary irrigation. So when you look at some of our conservation efforts, you can see that we're whittling those down. It's those new development, the new growth going in water-wise, and it's incentivizing the existing customers and residents to restructure their landscapes to be more efficient. Up in our area, 70%, 60-70% of the typical household's total water use for the year is going to their landscapes. And so when we see that as a great opportunity to engage with our customer base and really make a difference, recognizing that we can only control and work with the water storage and volumes that were delivered on an annual basis. Okay, that volume, this representation, so if we were to, if we look at that previous chart, we get those conservation measures adhered to, we can save, 86,000 acre feet year to year. That's the entirety of our Rockport and Lost Creek reservoirs, so substantial volumes of water. Drought management, so once again, we got contracts that allow for exercising the drought conditions. It's not pleasant, but they were there for a reason. The Great Salt Lake is obviously one of the things that we're going to be, to Bart's point, there's a lot of environmental considerations that maybe weren't present historically. I get engaged in a lot of water right issues for Weber Basin, and not too long ago I was looking at water right applications, change applications that have been submitted, appropriation requests, and the language within there where it was essentially, hey, we don't want to get it to the Great Salt Lake where it's just going to be wasted. And that mindset's changing, right? The Great Salt Lake is being realized as a huge natural resource that we want to protect, and we can do that through these conservation programs. So what are the goals of the district? We want to ensure sustainable use of the public's water resources, balance competing interests, understand impacts of land use jurisdiction decision to water infrastructure supply and demands, and plan for future water supply, and provide for economic prosperity and high quality of life. We too are very aware of the state's regional water conservation goals. If you look at what the state's document had up in our neck of the woods, they had us at about a baseline of 250 gallons per capita per day. Over the last several years, we've probably bounced around between 250 up to 270. The last several years, we've probably been a little bit lower than that, but we've got to go from about that range, that 250, 270, down to about 175 in a pretty aggressive time period. And so we're going to be looking at those same programs that Shelby mentioned, education, incentive, and metering. We've completed a water conservation management plan. We update these every 5 or so years, where we just basically put a roadmap together of what we're going to do to make sure that we can account for this growth and have that high quality of life and economic prosperity up in our neck of the woods. Education measures, we have thousands of school children come through where we educate in our learning gardens. We have free classes that we offer to the public. We've been very aggressive in the installation of secondary meters on our secondary meter customers, but we've also leveraged that as an opportunity to engage and educate our customer base in how much water they're using, how much water they should be using evapotranspiration calculations. We have a customer portal where customers can go in there and sign up for leak alerts. They can go in there and see their usage in near real time within 4 hours of the water going out there. And these have been lifesavers as we've had to go in there and short contracts and ask people to use less water. is that we've been able to provide a tool and a resource where people can get on and really make educated decisions about how they're using their water resources. Here's just some graphs of some of the participation we're seeing in some of our incentive programs up in our neck of the woods, and this is the one that has probably been the most impactful over the last year. This is our turf removal incentive program. The district engaged in this as a park strip centered program right now. We're going to be expanding that here not too shortly. But we asked our communities to adopt water efficiency standards for that new growth and new development. If they were willing to do that, then we would come in and help incentivize their existing customers to start removing turf from the park strip areas and replacing it with water-wise landscaping. Like Shelby had on one of her slides, we've had about 17 communities at this point that have adopted those standards, and those have been very helpful and engaging conversations, but they have come with a lot of staff time, energies, and expense to go to the planning commissions, the city councils, and present this type of information of how we can grow responsibly. So there you can kind of see the summary of what's going on there. We're planning for the future, water conservation management plans, drought contingency plans, climate vulnerability studies. We've taken the global climate models. We've downscaled them both statistically and, well, there's dynamic downscaling to really get an understanding of what we could expect as far as future climate in our area. Supply and demand studies are constantly being assessed and analyzed to make sure that they are taking the best data available and incorporating into our planning documents. So real quick, here's our conservation plan. The state's goal there is that dashed line at the bottom, and how we've laid out several different programs and how we're going to get there. So this is a dynamic, fluid document that allows us to go in there and assess kind of how we're doing year to year, where we need to be more aggressive, maybe where we need to focus more time to make sure that we're progressing like we need to. So real quick, I just want to say what we have done. So these are the results of some of the conservation efforts within our area. So this is the district's cumulative deliveries over the last several years. And you can see that bottom highlighted line is where we are. So this is through September. You'll see we plateau. Well, that's just because we haven't delivered any water in November and December. But you can see we're significantly down from where we've been historically. Once again, I would emphasize that this is largely a result of our customer base being educated and willing to participate in these programs, recognizing the situation that we've been operating within, the buy-in of other water right users and the agricultural community in doing this as well. Here's our delivery since the year 2000. So that solid purple line is kind of where we've bounced around, and that dashed line is kind of the population increase that we've seen. So you can see we've got a general down slope on that water deliveries being made from our groundwater and tunnel sources, and then an uptake in the population, just showing that we have had a lot of engagement and uptake of conservation programs, and we'll continue to push those aggressively. So future development, what are we looking at? Well, conservation is going to play a key role. Groundwater development, our aquifer storage and recovery programs, ag to M&I, so this is our agricultural lands that convert and develop, making sure that the water stays there. Wastewater reuse, we've completed a feasibility study on that. I've been awarded some Bureau of Reclamation funds to pursue those types of projects, as well as trans-basin diversion projects. So that's kind of my presentation, and I'll turn it over to Zack.
So while he's getting that going, I just want to put a couple of things in perspective, is that we're really not that depressing of people to be around. But I want to put it in perspective what we're facing. And so there was mentioned earlier about the paleoclimate models. And that's the tree rings, and we measure those. And we have a fascinating data here in the southwest United States for 1,000 years. We know how much it rained 800 years ago with a pretty good certainty. Well, when you take those 1,000 years and you start modeling all that out, so we're either in the first or second worst drought during that last 1,000 years. And the last time there was a drought of this type, there were Native Americans here at the time. Their population significantly decreased at that time because they did not have enough water to sustain life. And that's what we're basically facing. And at that time, the area depopulated. And now we have all these graphs saying that we're going to continue to populate and continue to grow. The other statistic behind that is last year on the Colorado River, so one of the things, my job is I'm on the Colorado River Authority of Utah, and they love graphs. And last year, we got about a 90% precipitation fall on in the upper Colorado River, but yet we only had a 30% average runoff. And so usually they kind of compare. If you get 90% snowfall, you get 90% runoff. And what happened was the snow and the water simply disappeared. Now, as engineers, we actually know where that water went, and it went into the ground, into the soils, into the trees, and all that. And so what that tells us is we're dealing with two things. We're dealing with a drier climate and a hotter climate, and those two things go apart. So we don't get into the whole climate warming, what's causing all that. I'm just simply here to tell you it is happening, and we have to deal with it. And this is what we're going to have to deal with. And these are very, very hard discussions moving forward, and we're going to talk to them. So, and being in the driest, well, I guess not the driest, one of the driest and the hottest place in the state of Utah, we, of course, are getting hit with this very hard. But we also happen to be the fastest growing population in just not the state of Utah, but in the country. And this kind of shows the population that's occurred. So right now we have a population around about 200,000, but the Kim C. Gardner Institute came in and said, down in your county, you actually have a lot higher population. So about 23% of our homes are secondary homes that aren't counted in this population. And then we have about 5 million visitors come. So we actually have more visitors per capita than Las Vegas that come to our county. And so we have to provide a lot of water for those people and the hotels. We have a single source like a lot of the other places here in the state of Utah, and that's the Virgin River. The Virgin River is your classic desert Mojave runoff, where one year it will be flooding and you'll see homes going into the river, and then the next 5 years will be complete drought. And the only way that we have been able to deal with this and allow our economy to grow was basically big, expensive, massive water projects. And that's the only reason why we can sit in this room today and have an economy that's continuing to grow, is because of these big, massive projects. So when they start talking about these dams, there was millions and millions of dollars that have been spent on that. And the only way to proceed forward with our climate changing is to continue those. I mean, we talked a lot about conservation. I'll talk about that too. But it's going to be mandatory to continue to build these big, huge projects to capture what little water we can. The cheap water is over. That was developed a long time ago. And so now to continue with that, we'll do our conservation, but these other projects are coming on. So this is Washington County. Now, this always cracks me up. So when I was in engineering school, I can tell you in every single class I took in engineering school, there was a graph or an Excel spreadsheet somewhere in that class. I got to law school, and in my first legal memo, I submitted to, I thought I was so smart. I submitted in my memo a graph. And my professor said, "You are an attorney, we don't like numbers." And that was her comment. And so I had to change. So sorry about my split personality. So this is our plan moving forward for the next few years. And there's a couple projects not on here, but this is kind of what we're looking at here. So that yellow line that you see there is based upon the most extreme conservations in the state of Utah, and in fact, most of the western United States. And so what happened, I wish it was on there, there was another bar that showed that we were basically going to run out of water by the end of next year. So I reached out to the home builders, and I said, and to the cities, and I said, listen, we are in a very, very bad position. And it's unique because, first of all, we live in a red state, and not only is Washington County located within a red state, it's one of the reddest counties in the state of Utah. And our home builders, they don't like regulations either. And so I sat down with the home builders, and I said, I need your help. And they said, what do you need? And I said, we need to pass all these water ordinances. And their comment was, we don't like regulations, we don't like strict ordinances. And I said, you know what, I apologize. I asked the wrong question. My question for you, do you want to build 1,000 homes or 2,000 homes? And so they were quiet for a minute, and they came back and says, we want to build 5,000 homes. So don't screw it up and tell us what we can do to help. And it was a game changer to have that question asked. The same thing, I reached out to the cities, and I said, cities, I'm going to need your help with something. And the same thing, these are all very, very staunch conservative people that do not like big government. They're very anti-government. And I said, hey, we need to do all this stuff. And they said, no, absolutely not. We're not doing it. We're sick of regulations. In fact, we're going through our ordinances and trying to figure out how to take things out of our ordinances right now. And I says, oh, I asked you the wrong question again. So you know that big, fat, massive master plan that you just passed and all that zoning stuff you just passed? And they says, yeah. And I says, well, I don't have a clue how you're going to get water for that. And I says, and in your plan, you're saying I'm going to give you the water, and I'm telling you not going to do that. And it was a complete shift in how the city's responded to it, and it was excellent. We had amazing conversations, very difficult conversations, and we're continuing to have very difficult conversations and moving forward. Well, that's our plan now. We still have a lot of other things that we're working on, but it is very contentious. One real other quick story is, and this, I'm sure a lot of people appreciate this. It's one of those things I wish I would have written down this guy's name, but I was driving along, and this guy calls me, and he says, hey, I need a will serve letter. I need a guarantee that you're going to supply my development water. And I said, no, I can't do that. I'm sorry. And he says, no, you don't understand. He goes through the project, and I says, great. I know it. I'm a civil engineer. I know exactly what you're saying about, and I'm not giving you the letter. And he was very upset. And the phone call ended. And so I was driving down south on I-15, and all of a sudden, about an hour later, the phone shows up, and I picked up. Because while I'm driving, I'll talk to anybody. And he says, you don't understand what I'm facing. I'm facing bankruptcy. And I says, what do you mean? He says, I just put together this investment package. We put all our money in. We went out into this community. We bought 20 acres of land for about $200,000 an acre. And what you're telling me, this land is worthless. He says, if you don't get me water to this land is worth maybe $200 an acre, but yet I just paid $200,000 an acre. That's what you're telling me. And I said, sir, I am not telling you that. What I'm telling you is you failed to do your due diligence. And I says, and I am also doing everything I can to make sure you have water for your development, so I need your help. And you know what? To his credit, he said, you know what, you're right. And now he came, I think it's the same guy. A guy came in, he has a proposal that is probably showing one of the most water efficiency master plan developments now in the state of Utah. And he went through all this stuff that he's doing, and it's pretty neat to see that response. Because this is the problem. If we don't have water, it's just not acceptable. Like I said, that land will go from $250,000 an acre to $200 an acre almost overnight. The cities, at least in my area, all our cities have these massive master plans and really aggressive growth plans, and none of that will be a reality. So of course we have our comprehensive water plan. It includes all this, of course, conservation, ag conversion, a lot of reuse, and that's growing up, and we still are continuing to work on the Lake Powell pipeline. Where's Craig Cowell? You saw it, right? Sorry, that's an inside joke. Washington County, we have done a lot. We've reduced our water use by more than any other place in the state of Utah. We were the first ones to meet the governor's goals. We've already invested $70 million in our conservation efforts, and we're going to continue to do that. These are some of our new ordinances. Basically, if you have commercial or retail or anything like that, zero grass. We're just not allowing it at all. There is some exceptions that you have to go to a city council and actually ask for a waiver, and it's pretty strict. Grass is limited, so essentially only, it varies from city to city a little bit, but generally, like in St. George City, the maximum amount of grass you can have is 8% of your landscaping can be grass. And then we're doing a lot more with the reuse and treating that. And of course, we have the indoor and other outdoor requirements about where you can put your grass, the type of grass you can have, and a few other things like that. Because what we really want to do is go to that type of landscaping right there where it's more efficient. You know, I got to give the home builders a lot of credit here because they deserve it. And so our Parade of Homes 20 years ago, if you would go to a Parade of Homes, which is a big deal in our county, you'd go there and it was grass from property line to property line, straight grass. And now the majority of them, they still had some grass, but a lot of it was at xeriscape. A lot of them easily comply with our new ordinances. And so what happens is the population will go and they'll look at this big, beautiful home and this beautiful landscaping, and they're adopting that. And so we haven't started grass rebate yet. We're working on that, but we're actually seeing a lot of organic changeover that people want to have the newer, nicer looking landscaping that's a lot easier to maintain. We've also done some research on it, not too in-depth, more anecdotal. But also the younger population does not want grass. And I'm kind of in that camp, where every Saturday I saw my dad out there mowing the lawn, and now the younger generation does not want every Saturday to consist of mowing the grass. And so they are also asking for landscaping that's easier to maintain, and zero-scape landscaping is much easier. We also, our school district did a survey, study, and they showed that actually zero-scape landscaping is actually cheaper in Washington County than if you planted grass. We're going to continue to do this. So we passed these really strict ordinances, but we're going to continue to talk about them. And we're developing a conservation committee where basically each city will assign a representative. We'll get together and talk about best practices, because this has to be an ongoing conversation. For example, we had a huge amount of discussion about car washes in our community, about what's the best way to deal with car washes. Because it seems like there's a car wash on every corner now. And there was a lot of discussion about that and how to handle that. The cities were not able to come to a resolution on the best way of doing that. And so, but it needs to happen. We need to have that discussion. And once that's done, evaporative cooling is another thing we need to talk about. And then we need to talk about swimming pools. And we need to talk about, so we need to continue to work on that. And so we're going to continue to work on that moving forward. That's another thing I want to talk about is, I would say the communities and people are kind of getting burned out of conservation. It's for the last 3 or 4 years, we've been pounding the message. A lot of people have been hearing it. They have been responding to it. And so we're kind of starting to change the message in Washington County. Instead of saying water conservation, because they've heard that now for 4 years and they're doing it, we're going to change it to environmental stewardship. And Utah has a very, very long history of being good stewards. It's also one of those things, I try not to be politically, I have to be politically neutral, but it's one of those things I've learned my audience. And so if I go into speak to a Democratic camp, I talk about regulations, I talk about water efficiencies, and then if I go over to the environmental camp where I'm speaking to theirs, I'll talk about being stewards of the land. I talk about keeping the environment healthy for the fishing, for the fish and deer hunting and all that, and for the farmers, and they get it. But what's interesting is it really is the same message, and that is we have a limited supply of water, and we have to make sure we're using that in the most efficient way possible. And with that, I'll have any questions later on. Thanks.
Okay, so you each have a microphone to share between 2 people there. So I'll lead off with some questions, and if we still have some time before the break, if any of you are thinking about any questions that you want to ask this group, then hopefully we'll have a minute or 2 to do that. The first question I wanted to start off with, yesterday the state of Utah had a press release specifically about some things that are going on in Washington County and some efforts that are being made there, as Zack has talked about, to improve the use of water. And there was a quote from Mr. Zachary Renstrom right here in that press release, and said, "In light of the current conditions on the Colorado River, our focus is on increased conservation and developing our local supply." So Zack, the question I want to start off with here, and this will be open to any of the panel members, but I'm going to just direct questions to one person at first, and then the others can jump in. So Zack, we hear a lot about reuse of water. What do we really mean when we talk about reuse? What is reuse water going to be used for? And what are the costs of reuse compared to other types of water? And are there any pitfalls to implementing a reuse program?
So essentially reuse water is sewer water that comes down into the water treatment plant, and we treat it. And right now we do treat it to a very high standard, and then we release it back into the environment. So now we're not going to necessarily do that. We're going to take that reuse water, store it, and reuse it basically. And so sometimes we're going to offset agriculture water, so a really high grade water that's being used for agricultural. We're going to swap them now with this sewer reuse water, or sometimes we're going to
give it to residentials to use it on their lawns. And in some cases, we're going to treat it and we're going to drink it. And so the tough thing is this, when you look at from the economics, this is the most expensive water there is out there. Because first of all, the treatment process is expensive and it takes time. There's a huge, massive political and public perception issue that we have to overcome. And so that's kind of what we're doing, is taking our sewer water and treating it, and we'll drink it.
Okay, so we know St. George, Washington County is maybe has fewer options when it comes to water, but I think reuse is applicable other areas of the state. So other members of the panel, any thoughts you have about pitfalls associated with reuse, or yeah, Bart, let's go to you.
Yeah, thanks. So I think reuse makes a whole lot of sense in the southern part of our state. Where it's looking like it might not make as much sense as it may have in the past is in the northern part of our state, especially in the Great Salt Lake Basin, where if you're recycling or reusing water, essentially what happens is you treat it, or you put it back into an irrigation system, or you use it for direct potable reuse purposes. What happens is the water depletes further, and then the return flows to the Great Salt Lake diminish. And so we're very concerned about the Great Salt Lake. And what we want to do within the Great Salt Lake Basin is to reduce depletion or reduce consumption. How much water are we taking out of the system where it doesn't get back into the system? So reuse will do that. Now I will say, a little caveat there is that there is a tremendous amount of import water that comes into the Great Salt Lake Basin from other basins. There's water that would have gone to the Colorado River that it's captured and it's brought over into the Great Salt Lake Basin. Jordan Valley Water is the largest user of Colorado River water in the state of Utah currently. Not many people know that. and so with that import water, there are requirements by the federal government as part of the overall Central Utah Project supply to do a certain amount of reuse. So there will be some reuse. I think there are cases where it makes sense to do some reuse, but for the most part, we're very concerned about depletion and declining levels of the Great Salt Lake.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I don't disagree, and I think the Great Salt Lake is a resource that we certainly need to be cognizant of. The Weaver Basin drainage is one of the river systems that discharges into the Great Salt Lake. We want to make sure that we're using the waters efficiently. I do think that as we look to optimize the uses of our existing supplies and be efficient in those utilizations, how we structure and how the water is intended to be used in a reuse application will affect how efficient it's being used. Some of the analogies, I'm horrible with analogies, so if you want to come and call me out on it later, by all means do it. You can get my email, I'm sure, from somebody here. But you know, I kind of equate it to if we can utilize reuse in a space station type application, right? Where we got indoor water use, we got growth that's happening. A lot of that indoor use has minimal depletions associated with it. And so if reuse is structured such that it's augmenting our indoor water uses and basically gets trapped in that cyclic, cycle where there's minimal depletion taking place, then you will have that initial withdrawal, which will be an impact. But hopefully you have that initial withdrawal and then you are being way more efficient subsequently prior to that project. So I bring it up just as not all reuse, there's a lot of intricacies, and the way it's structured and the way it's intended to be used will have impacts on how efficient and what its impacts are to the environment.
So I want to translate something for just a minute here, because I was going to say we have to be careful about not using too many words that maybe not everybody understands, right? So withdrawal of water is when there's a river coming down or a well, you take the water out of its natural environment and you use it for some other purpose. So that's the withdrawal of water from the system. Return flow refers to once you've taken that water out of the natural system, how much of it gets back to the system, and there's a variety of ways that can happen. So the water that gets withdrawn and then delivered to you at your house, when you flush the toilet or take a shower or do anything that runs water down the drain, that water goes to a sewer plant. That's return flow because it goes from the sewer plant back into the river. So when you talk about return flows, that's what we're talking about. Water that was originally taken out, but a portion of it comes back. And and then consumption is the amount that doesn't go back. That's the amount that's gone. It's used by plants or something else that may be evaporation where the water is gone. And so to Bart's point about import water, so water that comes into the Salt Lake Basin from the Duchesne River or from over in the Colorado River Basin, that comes over, we measure it in acre feet. About what percentage do you think of water that is delivered to homes ends up as return flows?
So the water that's being delivered to a home for indoor use, the rule of thumb really is about 90% gets back to the river system. So about maybe 10% is consumed. So for the most part, most of it gets back. But there's also a component, so the import water is also being used on landscapes. And so there's a component there too. Landscapes deplete water, of course, but there's percolation, there's water that runs off, you see it in the gutters, going into the storm drain, it gets back into the system. So there is a percentage also of the water that's being used on landscapes getting back into the natural system.
Okay, so next question, Shelby, we'll go to you with this. You were the one who first introduced the regional water conservation goals, and we've heard a lot about those. Utahns and Utah in general is often accused of using more water per capita or being among the highest water users of water per capita in the nation. I don't know if any of you watch John Oliver. He had something to say about this a few weeks ago, and you shouldn't watch it with your kids. But my question that we'll start off with you, and the others can contribute as well, as I said, is this true? Are Utahns abnormally high users of water? If it's not true, why do the statistics say that we are so maybe incompatible with some other people in other states?
All right, great question. So our gallons per capita per day, in Utah we're really good at accounting our water. We have a great data collection program in Utah done by the Division of Water Rights and the Division of Water Resources. And so we're really good at counting our water use, but that can also make us look bad because we are such good at accounting. We're so good at accounting. So there are three main methods in the Western United States for calculating gallons per capita per day. The first one is the total demand, so that's the total water delivered or the total demand. And this is all of the water that's delivered by a water agency to meet the system's demands. The second method is gallons per capita per day water use. And this is accounting for the water that's used by the customer. And it corresponds with the metered water or estimated if the system doesn't have a meter. At the water users connections. And the third is gallons per capita per day consumptive. And so this accounts only for water that is consumed, that is not returned to the system. And so for example, if you compare these three different methods, gallons per capita per day could be 190 for the first one, 175 for the second, and 130 for the third, just depending on the method that you calculate it by. So what we're always saying is it's not apples to apples comparisons. Nobody calculates water the same way in the Western United States. So in Utah, we're great at accounting, and so it's really hard to be comparing our total water use and our gallons per capita per day to, let's say, a system that subtracts the return flows from their gallons per capita per day. So measurement is really important. We're always saying that you can't manage what you can't measure. And so our gallons per capita per day numbers are really good for comparing our water use numbers with our regional goals and with where we want to be as a state, but not so much with comparing to other states or other systems outside of our state.
Okay, so all three of these other individuals here have some opinions about this as well. And I might go to Zack first. So how much worse are people in St. George than in Las Vegas?
We're talking about water, right?
That's right. We're talking about water use, yes.
I lived in Las Vegas. I actually practiced law in Las Vegas for several years, and so I know them pretty good. So if you just Google this, they'll come up and it says in Washington County we're using 300 gallons per day per person, and in Las Vegas it'll come out around 100. And I hear that all the time. And what it really is kind of going back to that. I use a simple analogy that basically in Las Vegas, if you take a shower and use 10 gallons of water, they will report that shower as using maybe a half a gallon of water. In Washington County, if you took the exact same shower and used 10 gallons of water, we would report that probably 13 gallons. And it's just very hard for the public to understand that. And it causes massive, massive confusion among the population. And it's something that the state of Utah, we have to fix it because it is costing the state of Utah substantial federal funding. So, one of the things I'm doing very hard right now is trying to go out. There's a lot of federal dollars right now, and I am talking to anybody back east to get us money here in the state of Utah. And the state and all these gentlemen in the state of Utah is working on this. But the vast majority I hear is, well, if you guys would just if you just turn off your faucet while you're brushing your teeth, you wouldn't need this money. And so it's caused a lot of confusion. It's something that has to change. If not, we're going to continue to get a bad rap.
Okay, and I'll just add an editorial comment here. So each one of the methods that Shelby described has value for a particular purpose, right? It's important to know on the withdrawal side, it's important, the state engineer, that's their sole job, is to make sure people aren't taking too much water out of the system to hurt other people who are further in the line. That number is really important. Knowing how much you deliver to a customer is really important because it allows a system to look and say, are we losing water in between where we take it out and where we deliver? Do we need to reduce our water losses in our pipes or some other way? And then the other number with the return flow, the consumption is an important number, and it's actually probably more important now than ever because when we're talking about Great Salt Lake, we potentially confuse issues here when we talk about a higher gallon per capita per day when a lot of that water may be returning back to go to the Great Salt Lake. And so it's a good time for the state not necessarily to abandon its past practices, but to look at the way that it reports gallons per capita per day and maybe modify how some of that information is disseminated so that we can move forward with the things that matter, which is how to best use our water rather than having other people call us names all the time. Okay, so we'll go to a question for John. Now, there's a lot of talk about the true cost of water. And that Utahns, again, don't conserve water because some of the costs for water development and delivery are paid out of property taxes. If property tax for water is eliminated, do you think, and for this group in particular, there's a lot of things that we could talk about on this topic, but for this group in particular, what effect might that have on land development? Could it result in higher costs for land development, and why or why not?
Yeah, and I'll just start by saying I am very appreciative that this is open to the entire group because Weaver Basin's scenario is going to be slightly different than Washington County's, which is going to be different than Jordan Valley's. And so a lot of my perspective is going to be based on Weaver Basin's unique setup. It's also going to be reflective of, I haven't worried about this for a long time. I haven't been in the water industry since 1985. So I've got a slightly, less involved history with this particular topic. But in short, the answer is yes. In Weaver Basin's particular scenario, we have an ability to tax up to 0.0002 is our taxing authority by the Conservancy District Act. We've also had our voters vote on this twice. So we're in a little bit unique in that it's not just the Conservation Act that's legitimizing what's happening up in Weaver Basin's neighborhood. We've also had it to our voters 2 times, basically authorizing our utilization of ad valorem taxes to pay for the federal government's project in that 1950-1960 construction of those dams, the aqueducts, the canal systems that we have, as well as the operation, maintenance, and replacement of those facilities. And so if those were to go away, historically those ad valorem taxes have accounted for about, no more than 10% of the district's total budget and total revenues that we're bringing in. And so it's a fairly, relatively speaking, it's a minor, or a lower volume of what the monies are bringing in. Most of our monies are coming in through water rates, as well as impact fees that are assessed on our secondary systems and things like that. So, from our perspective, if ad valorem went away, rates would probably go up 50, 60, 70%. is what we would see across the board as an increase that we would expect to have to accommodate and account for those loss of revenues that we have. Another thing to account for is we're engaged in a lot of regional programs. Like I mentioned in my presentation, we are one water right holder in a big sandbox of water right holders, but we are often engaged in regional programs that utilization of ad valorem taxes to help master planning for future water development projects in communities that don't have a master plan. Some of these regional incentive programs as it relates to conservation. These are not programs that are solely available to our ratepayers. These are available to communities that may have 30% of their water being made up by deliveries from Weaver Basin and the balance from their own sources, or communities that have some other percentage. And so I think as we look at some of those, we do have opportunities to engage in regional programs, watershed health, wildfire mitigation programs, recreation, flood control. These are all regional programs that are made available to the community as a whole, not just the Weaver Basin ratepayer. These ad valorem taxes act to help augment our ability to participate in those programs. And so from our perspective, yeah, it absolutely would. Maybe the others have some thoughts.
Go ahead, Bart.
Yes, thanks. So water districts, as set forth in the Water Conservancy Act, have three primary funding sources. User charges, which are water rates, impact fees, and property tax. So that's where generally we derive our annual revenue. And so if property tax were removed, and I think it would be different for all of us, for all the water districts across the state, but we would have to find that revenue from somewhere else. You know, our costs, many of our costs are fixed. We do the best we can to run as lean as we can, but we're going to have to find that money from somewhere else. So John said that you know, basically water rates would have to go up. If Jordan Valley's property tax were removed, our water, and we wanted to get all the money back for the water rates, our water rates would go up significantly overnight. But the other area would be impact fees. And Jordan Valley doesn't use a lot of impact fees currently, but it's entirely possible that our board, as it analyzes how to continue to make ends meet, impact fees might play a much larger role in bringing in revenue for future growth, because as Zack mentioned earlier, all the cheap water has been developed, and everything we do now is going to cost a lot of money. And so property tax plays a role. It provides for revenue stability. That revenue stability helps us with our bonding. Our creditors, the bond rating agencies, they like the fact that we have that stability. It gives us the highest bond rates. So Jordan Valley is a AA plus rated company, and that helps us keep the cost of borrowing down. More than likely, if our property tax was removed, our credit rating would probably suffer, and we wouldn't get the kind of good bond rates or borrowing rates that we have now. So that hurts. That hurts the public, and so there's a lot to be said about property tax. We can talk about this for hours, but that's essentially what would happen. Now, in our service area, Central Utah Water District also set levies of property tax. So if you look at your property tax bill, if you live in Salt Lake County, you're going to see you pay property tax it's in our service area, Jordan Valley Water and the Central Utah Water District. If both were removed overnight, the potential is that we would have to increase rates by over 100%. So your rates would double. And that, I think, would be a concern. So that's my short take on property tax.
And Zack, do you see any difference in St. George? Or maybe a follow-up question is, do rates alone, is that the most important factor in people conserving, or is it a multitude of factors there?
So rates definitely have a component that come into water conservation, but there's a price elasticity of the price of water. But for our county, if it wasn't for property tax, our two main reservoirs would not exist. If there was some way we could go out, it really just would cost the taxpayers or the citizen of the state a whole lot more money. And so that's what it is. If we take it away, it's going to cost you more money. If we have it, it's going to cost you less.
Okay. Let's go to a question for Bart. How important are water-efficient fixtures in preserving water supply? I think this might be something near and dear to some of your hearts out there in the audience. But how important are water-efficient fixtures, and really what role do they play in this whole overall picture of water conservation?
Yeah, so we've talked a lot today about landscaping, and naturally that's where the greatest water conservation potential exists. However, there's considerable conservation savings that can be achieved through more efficient indoor water use. Last legislative session, the state legislature approved for all new construction a reduction in the maximum allowable flow rates for 3 fixtures, shower heads, bathroom faucets, and urinals. It's a great move. So now all of these fixtures that go into place for new construction will be water efficient. The one thing that didn't make it last year was high efficiency toilets. So the current standard is 1.6 gallons per flush. And the new high efficiency toilets, they flush at 1.28 gallons per flush. Toilets are the highest water using fixtures in a home. And so that's where the biggest gains can be made in water use efficiency. And so we think, so we're gonna once again talk to the state legislature this year about changing the code for these water efficient toilets. Hopefully it'll make it through this year, but it's important. And you know, across the state of Utah, our water use per capita for indoor use is about 60 gallons per person per day. We should be able to get down to 45 gallons per person per day if we're able to get these fixtures replaced properly and have the new fixtures installed as part of new construction.
And that's indoor use, right?
That's indoor use, and indoor use is very important.
And Shelby, do you have anything to say about programs for water efficient fixtures or things like that?
Yeah, so we currently have statewide rebates for toilet replacement, for replacing toilets that use more than 1.6 gallons per flush. These are often found in homes built before 1994 when new standards went into place. So those are available on utahwatersavers.com for up to $100 per toilet, max of 2 per home. And then we also have rebates for smart irrigation controllers, which can save, I think it's around like 13,000 gallons of water per year. And my favorite part of those is that you can turn things on and off from your phone. You don't have to go out to your controller. So even just for the ease and the convenience of that, it also takes into account the weather data. So it will skip when it's raining, that kind of thing. And we have partnerships with these water conservancy districts to help us process these applications.
Yeah, and so I've wanted to focus most of our discussion on future growth, but it's important that we also think about existing conditions and how we're using water currently and how we can improve that. Because, for example, the water efficient toilets probably needs to apply not to just future uses, probably needs to apply to existing uses as well, so that when you go to Home Depot and you buy a toilet, you're not buying a water inefficient toilet if we're trying to reduce water. We probably need to look at this as a broader issue that applies so that everybody is part of the solution. Because I think as you've heard everybody talk here, there's a strong need for all components to be involved, all different kinds of users involved, whether you're a homeowner, a business owner, industrial user, or a farmer. Everybody's gonna have to be involved in these discussions because no one single area can really solve this problem of trying to conserve more. We're getting a little bit closer, maybe 1 or 2 more questions here. And Shelby, I'm going to ask you a question, and it's unfair because you won't be able to answer it. But I'm going to ask you anyway. So we talked about House Bill 121, which gave the $5 million in funding for removal of existing turf grass. I really shouldn't ask this question. Should there be funding at the state level to help pay for water efficient landscaping in new construction as opposed to existing? If so, where would the money come from and what might that look like?
All right, thanks, Mark. He did give me a warning, so I did have something to prepare, so thank you for that. So as Mark said, House Bill 121 appropriated $5 million for grass removal programs, and that is for, like he said, existing living maintained grass. So as far as new construction, some of the water conservancy districts may have some options through landscape leadership grants and local scapes rewards that you guys might want to speak a little bit more on, just of targeting new construction and helping offset the cost of water-wise landscaping as opposed to just putting grass down everywhere. I think this $5 million is a great start. We would love to see this become ongoing funding. And as far as where the money should come from and how much should be provided, I think incentives are a great way to foster water conservation and to get more savings. And these incentives could potentially come from water conservancy districts if cities want to operate programs, or the state. So if this is something you'd like to see, I'd encourage you to talk with your elected officials and your city's legislators and let them know what you're interested in seeing as far as programs go.
Thank you for that diplomatic response. So, yeah, that's a tough nut to crack. I mean, and my buddy Chris Gambroulis is like, you know, and well, everybody's a builder in here is saying this is a big deal to put in a different kind of landscaping and costs. And how do we account for that when we're trying to keep housing affordable? And I don't know what the answer is, because I don't know that you're going to find a big piggy bank full of money from the state to help with landscaping and new development. But as we've talked about, it's a critical thing that we have to address. Now, a question. Don't know who. Maybe I won't identify a specific person here. I'll see who's the most excited to answer this question. So there's been some discussion about the continued need, even with conservation and all of the things we can do to become more efficient at water use, that as we look at the growth and we look at what is going to be needed for that growth for water purposes of additional projects. And the two most high visibility are Lake Powell Pipeline and Bear River Project. And not getting into the details of those, are we still going to need these projects? But perhaps more importantly, if we do these projects, can they be done in a way that recognizes the needs of the environment and competing interests in water?
So you said Lake Powell Pipeline. So I have to respond. So, I look at our community, but I really do care about the entire state. I grew up in North Ogden. I love North Ogden, and I look at there. And in this country, in the early part of the 1900s, we had great, big, huge projects built. And so I grew up with the huge benefit of Pine View Reservoir. And my uncle's farms got all that water. And then for some reason in this country, we just kind of stopped. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But if we don't start building these big projects again and starting to go, I don't know how we're going to supply the state of Utah water. There's no other way. These big projects give us more tools. And so if I had the Lake Powell Pipeline as a tool right now, I could operate my system much more efficiently. With climate variability, or whatever you want to call it, we see trends, and so some years it's wet and some years it's dry, and to be able to tap into Lake Powell that existed for 100 years effectively, and we got to stop California from stealing our water. That's another part. But we need these projects, we need these tools as operators. And so I think if you looked at all those plans, you saw graphs going up, and there are certain parts of that graph that showed new projects, and we have to have them. It's not an option.
And to the point about environment and other competing interests, other thoughts about how these projects might be modified to do something they didn't weren't planned on doing originally?
So I just have a thought here, and I've been thinking about this a lot. When I first started at Jordan Valley Water, I'm a water buffalo now, so 35 years ago, the complexion of water deliveries from Jordan Valley Water to the public was about 65% outdoor use, 35% indoor. And over time, it's changed. Some of it's been due to water conservation and outdoor, and some of it's due to increased density that we're seeing within our service area. But now it's closer to 55-45 or maybe even 50-50. So that's changing. what we've been talking about today is to see that change go even further. If we continue to remove turf grass, we landscape in more a water efficient manner, what happens is most of our water use now starts to be indoor use. So at some point it could be we go to 70-30, 80-20, 80% indoor, 20% outdoor. Now what happens is we're depleting very little water. There's all this agricultural use out there, and from time to time there's agricultural conversion to M&I use. Agricultural uses may deplete 50% of the water, whereas now for M&I it could be much less. And so what I see is M&I use, municipal use for drinking water purposes, changing a lot to mostly indoor use so that water now gets back into the system. And if we convert from agricultural use that's taking 50% out of the system to M&I use that's now putting more water back into the system, that is a path forward for us to be able to develop more water in the future and still provide a lot of water back into our system and to help bolster the Great Salt Lake.
John, do you have anything to add? We're kind of out of time, but if you have anything quickly that you want to add.
I have nothing to add.
All right. Okay, so I'm sorry we didn't have time for public questions. Craig's letting me know that we need to be done. She was supposed to have a break.
Take the time. You had no comment from the audience. Go ahead and do so.
Okay, thank you, Craig. So do we have anybody who has a burning question that they want to put forward to anybody or all of these people?
We welcome burning comments too.
Yes.
Yeah, so question about land use. You made reference to more efficient water use for higher density developments. Is there any data or resources that kind of break down land use as far as residential use types, single family detached, condos, apartments, and on the flip side, are there reliable sources of data for commercial users as well for future land use planning? Car washes were mentioned, but are there other high water users that are specifically along the Wasatch Front, but in Utah generally?
So I actually might just take this away from everybody else for just a minute. So if you look at the amount of water that is delivered to a particular land use type, and I might need a slight bit of a system, but if you look at quarter acre lots with 4 houses and land, that is actually going to use more water because of the landscaping than, say, townhomes would on that same acre of property. And so you're going to have to deliver more there, but you get less return flow back to the system because of the landscaping. But townhomes are more efficient. They use less water overall because there's not as much landscaping. You're using more indoors. There's more returning. But as you grow and grow and grow, eventually when you get to high-density apartments, that will actually require more water than the single-family homes because there are so many apartments there, that you're going to have to deliver a lot of indoor water, but it's the best at return flows. Now, and that may not be 100% answer your question, but that's one of the challenges that all the districts face as they're planning, is if we get really high-density, high residential uses, that might be really efficient for land use, but it's going to require delivery of more water, going to require a larger distribution system and treatment system, but you are going to get more return flows back. And so there's a lot of competing factors that when you look at land use types, what the trade-off is for those land uses. So I hope nobody's offended that I took that away. Any other questions?
We read frequently in the newspapers that agriculture takes about 85% of our available water. What is being done to reduce the use by agriculture, but increasing the agriculture production to the same level that we're doing? That to me seems like one big problem that I have not got a solution for. And I'm a long-time farmer.
That's a great question. And nobody here is a specific expert on that, but any of you want to talk about optimization efforts that you're aware of or how ag is being addressed there?
So there's a ton of ag optimization. So, as a lot earlier we had flood irrigating. And then we moved to the pivots, and there's a big water savings there. Now even those pivots, they're doing a lot. And so there's a significant funding available to farmers to improve those systems. Also, canals, they used to be just open, just gravel. They're going to concrete. Now we're switching them to pipe. And so there's a lot of things that we're doing with that ag optimization, both at the federal level, the state level, and then even the districts. I know, well, Bart's doesn't have a lot of farming, but the rest of us, we are trying to help those farmers be more and more efficient. Our legislature actually just did a ton of bills specifically addressing how to help those farmers out. I will say there's a lot of friction between, I shouldn't say friction, but a lot of discussion because this might sound stupid, but what's the definition of a farm? Is it 2 acres or is it 2,000 acres? And there's a big difference there too.
Yeah, so the Department of Agriculture, if anybody knows any farmers that's interested in this, has funding available that was appropriated by the state to help with optimization projects to improve water efficiency on farms. And some other legal changes that have been made to try to make it easier for water to bypass a farm and maybe get to a use downstream that's an environmental use.
Real quick, Mark, just from Weaver Basin's perspective, I mean, we do have a lot of agriculture that takes place up in our district. And we are always looking for opportunities to engage with them. We have acted as sponsors for several of our irrigation companies to receive federal monies in the NRCS grant programs to pipe their canal systems, do the repairs on their dams and things like that. And so we're always looking for opportunities to engage and facilitate those types of dialogues. They're also, I like the idea and the implication that that question brought up that this is we've talked a lot about M&I and residential usage of water, and largely that's because that's what most of our portfolio consists of. But as we look for the growth and accommodating that, it will be involvement from all these different users of water. And we're going to have to be innovative and incorporate a lot of more efficient irrigation techniques and optimizations of crop yields and things like that. So,
Craig, some announcements from you?
Yes, thank you. If you're here for real estate credit, you should have already signed the roster outside for real estate. Sign it again during the break, and then at the end of the session, you'll get a certificate at the registration desk for your 2 signatures on there. For attorneys, we just need to have you make sure you sign the roster. If you don't sign the roster, we won't even know for sure that you were an attorney. So please sign. 3 hours credit today for real estate and for lawyers. Thanks to this panel. Good job. Appreciate it.